welcome to Dodger's Trips. I'm Dodger, and today I'm heading to a location in Low Moor, Bradford. Quite a picturesque place. The families come and spend time here, picnicking, but it's a place that is more associated with hurt, pain, sadness and torment than probably anywhere else in Low Moor down the years. So join me, will you? So, here we are at the dam. It's had various names down the years as this stretch of water, commonly known as Royds Dam. Royds Hall being the house up on the hill, the big manor house, or Park Dam. Nearby Harrow Park is quite unique in the Bradford district. It's the only park with its own dam, and it's these waters here that feed into the lake at Harrow Park, so it can be topped up or lowered. And this is commonly used now for fishing, if you got the right licence. It's used by a lot of fishermen. But as I say, down the years, this stretch of water has become a place of great sadness. It's been linked with so many suicides and the occasional accident on the water. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of those stories, about the people who did lose their lives here.
Royds Dam, Park Dam and the Great Dam are all names that have been used for this stretch of open water. I believe, and please let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, that it belonged to the local ironworks and was used by them as a water supply for their iron making. Certainly, some newspaper accounts during the 20th century state the dam was owned by the Yorkshire Best Iron Company, and at that time was described as private property. During the course of the film, I shall try and refer to it always as Royds Dam. Please bear in mind that the tragedies of which you are about to hear are not comprehensive or always complete. There is not always an end to the stories. Should you be so interested, then use the information that I share here to make your own inquiries.
So, it was possible before those houses over there were built in the maybe late 80s, 90s. It was possible to walk all the way around the dam. But now we can't. We're going to have to come down to the end and then we'll go back and walk back around. How nice to have a house there with a garden that leads down to water.
There's no way an accurate number can be put to the fatalities that have occurred at the dam. Without doubt, it amounts to dozens and maybe more than 100. So remember, there are many more such similar tales than the ones I will bring to your attention today. One can only begin to imagine the dark clouds that covered the thoughts of the people who decided to give up their lives here. This is why Royds Dam can truly be called a place of great sorrow. On the 28th of March 1889, an enquiry was held at the Royal Hotel in Low Moor concerning the death of 66-year-old Matthew Gummersall, a cattle dealer and farmer of Beckhill, Buttershaw. The dead body of Matthew Gummersall, who had been unfortunate in business and had lived on his own for the previous 2 years, had been pulled from the waters of Royds Hall Dam on the morning of Monday, the 25th of March, 1889. Matthew's body had been discovered by Thomas Snowball, a farm bailiff from nearby Royds Hall. His hat and jacket lay on the bank. The body recovered by the police showed no signs of violence, save for a few slight bruises which were easily accounted for. The jury at the inquiry concluded that Matthew had taken his own life, probably while in a state of temporary insanity. It was noted that a member of his family had destroyed himself in the same way at the same place not too long before. The Yorkshire Post of Friday the 14th of November 1890 reported that the previous day a body of a woman named Ruth Lightowler, wife of James Lightowler of Manchester Road, had been found in the reservoir. Ruth had been at a sewing party in Low Moor on the Wednesday evening. When she left carrying a basket and a parcel, she said she was meeting her husband at Hilltop in Low Moor. As Ruth had spent some years in Low Moor, the newspaper surmised that it is highly unlikely that she lost her way and walked into the water accidentally. This and the fact that the basket and the parcel have not been found raised the possibility of suicide or foul play. On the morning of Thursday, 27th of September 1894, Fred Mortimer, a young man from Hilltop in Low Moor, discovered a body in Royds Hall Dam. This was subsequently identified as that of W. Rawstron of Oxhays, Shelf, near Halifax. The deceased was a commercial traveller employed by W. B. Dick & Co., oil refiners of Liverpool. In actual fact, by 1894, W. D. Dick had merged with John Kerr with the new company name of Dick, Kerr & Co., and they went on to become important manufacturers of rolling stock for railways and tramcars. Mr. Rawstron was 64 years of age, had a wife and 3 children. The Leeds Mercury reported that he had been drinking heavily recently. The body was removed to the Victoria Hotel. This may well have been the Victoria Inn at Halifax Road, North Aureham. This later became known as Queen Victoria, and more recently, the 22 Bar and Smokehouse. The Factory Times, on the 26th of July, 1895, reported that 80-year-old Robert Walker, who had formerly been employed by the Low Moor Iron Company as a watchman, had attempted to commit suicide the previous Saturday. Robert had walked from his daughter's house in Bradford around 8 o'clock to Royds Hall Dam, where after cutting his own throat, he had jumped into the water. A man named Ellis saw this and was able to get Robert out of the water. The newspaper reported that he is expected to recover from his injuries. A Yorkshire Evening Post reporter visited the dam on the 17th of December 1896 and learnt that the body of a woman pulled from the water the day before had been identified as that of Frances Worsnop, the only daughter of James Worsnop of Morley Carr in Low Moor. Frances lived at home with her parents, and her occupation was that of a weaver. It was only the previous Monday morning that she had gained employment at Mr. W.T. Brake's, a manufacturer at Hilltop. The reporter said that her death pointed to suicide, but there appeared to be no motive at that stage. Quite a number of people had inspected the body the previous afternoon, which was rumoured to be that of anything up to half a dozen people, but it was not until the evening that identification was established. Frances had left home around 6 in the morning, and when she failed to return home, enquiries were made for her whereabouts. Her brother Arthur Worsnop viewed the corpse and recognised it as that of his sister. Frances is buried at St. Mark's Church, Low Moor. On Thursday, 28th of September 1899, William Henry Bailey of New Roadside identified a coat and cap found at Royds Hall Dam as items belonging to his son Jared, aged 24. Police were dragging the dam. The next day it was reported that the body of Jared had been recovered and that he had committed suicide. Mr. Barstow held an inquest on Saturday the 30th September into the death of Jared Bailey. The Bradford Daily Telegraph reported that 2 pathetic letters from the deceased were read out, one to his mother and father, the other to a friend. They expressed his unhappiness at being out of work and ill. He wrote of whirling in his head. He had not, however, complained at home. The jury returned a verdict of suicide while of unsound mind. Jared Bailey is buried at St Mark's Church in Low Moor. Later in November of the same year, 2 bodies, unrelated to each other, were recovered from the dam on successive days. Friday the 23rd was 14-year-old Ida Smith's birthday. She left her house at 7:30 in the morning, but no anxiety was felt until she failed to return for breakfast. Then her parents, recalling the fact that she had been low-spirited and depressed recently, and then hearing that she had been seen in the neighbourhood of the dam, became concerned and informed the police. All day that Friday, dragging was carried out, and then on the Saturday morning, Ida's body was recovered. The Leeds Mercury reported that Ida had very much taken to heart the recent death of her young niece, and had been found crying at the grave of the child, though it was not thought that she had ever threatened to take her own life. The day after Ida's body was pulled from the waters, the body of Willie Rogers, aged 52, a tripe dealer from School Street in Wyke, was discovered. The jury, investigating the circumstances of his death, deemed he had committed suicide whilst temporarily insane, following a heavy bout of drinking. On the 26th of April 1907, a jury at an inquest into the death of Arthur Wood also reached the verdict of suicide whilst temporarily insane. Arthur was just 17 years of age, a dyer's labourer from Wyke, who reportedly had been troubled by his work. The Brighouse News reported that the body of Willie Holsworth, a 36-year-old labourer of No. 6 Royds Street, New Roadside, was recovered from the dam on Monday the 23rd of September 1907. A man's cap and coat had been discovered near the water's edge. Police constables had then carried out a dragging operation. With the result, the body was found. Apparently, Willie, who had been in poor health recently, left home early that same morning, but his family had no reason to suppose anything unusual was the occasion of his leaving. The Leeds Mercury names the man as Walter Holsworth. I suppose Willie must have been his nickname. The paper reported a remarkable suggestion had been mooted as to the reason for Mr. Holsworth's death. Being very fond of money, he had recently had to purchase a set of false teeth, and this had weighed so heavily on his mind that he had become unhinged. On Saturday the 13th of June 1908, an inquest was held at Bradford Town Hall into the death of Henry Mitchell, an engine tenter of 27 Glasshouse Place, Low Moor, whose body was pulled from the dam the previous day. Adeline Mitchell, stepmother of the deceased, stated that he had lived at her house until a week ago, when he had gone to Glasshoughton Colliery in Castleford. She told how Henry had been out of work a good deal since Christmas, because he had been ambitious to get better positions and had thrown away those that he'd had. She added that Henry had suffered a great deal with influenza over the same time period. Since he had left last week, she had not seen him until seeing his body in the mortuary. Jessie Biles, a horsekeeper of Carhouse Gate, said that at about 7 o'clock on the Friday morning he'd been coming along the road near to Royds Hall Dam when he saw some clothing on the dam bank. He picked up the clothes and took them to the police station. He had passed the dam the night before and had not seen the cap and coat then. Police Sergeant Wood started a dragging operation and found the body of the deceased around 8:30. The body was without cap or coat, but otherwise dressed. The jury returned a verdict that Henry Mitchell had committed suicide, but there was no evidence as to the state of his mind. John Bottomley, aged 57, a chimney sweep of Guy Street in Bradford, had been reported missing from his home. When a soot bag was found on the dam bank, a dragging operation commenced. The remains of the missing Mr. Bottomley were discovered on the 6th of October 1909. In December 1909, there was the sad case of a Low Moor headmistress committing suicide at the dam. Emma Cottam resided at the school house, Common Road, in Low Moor. The Bradford Daily Telegraph reported on the 13th of December that her body had been found floating in the water at 10:15 that morning. Milton Jagger of Cartwheel Street, Low Moor, had been proceeding down Royds Hall Drive when he spotted an umbrella at the water's edge. He made his way to the dam and saw a body floating, apparently dead. He reported this to the police, and the body was recovered about 11 o'clock and taken to the public mortuary at Bradford, where it was subsequently identified as that of Emma Cottam, schoolmistress of Holy Trinity Schools. The paper stated that the deceased had been in poor health recently and in consequence very much depressed. The Bradford City Coroner held an inquest on Wednesday the 15th of December. The Leeds Mercury, reporting the following day, stated Miss Cottam was 53 years of age and the headmistress of Holy Trinity Infant School at Low Moor. Charles Broderick Cottam, Miss Cottam's brother, said his sister had not been well for a few weeks and had been worried a little over school matters. Some of the children had been ill with smallpox and the attendance was very much down. Ida Gillians, a maid at Royds Hall Manor House, said that on the night in question she had heard a scream and a slight splash near the dam, but had not taken any notice of it. Kate Haig, an assistant mistress at the school, produced a letter which had been found in a private drawer belonging to Miss Cottam, and it was addressed to Reverend Harold Flynn, the curate of Holy Trinity. The letter was very incoherent and in one part stated, "I enclose these entry books. The money I solemnly declare I give it to you to help to make good what you or the managers may suffer for any wrongs anywhere in my books." The letter concluded, "Worry, worry. I wonder what they think we are made of." Reverend Flynn said Miss Cottam had given complete satisfaction and she was not wrong in any money matters. The jury returned a verdict of death by suicide whilst temporarily insane. On the morning of the 26th of August 1911, the body of a young man was recovered from the dam following a dragging operation, after two men the previous evening had found a cap and jacket on the bank. The Leeds Mercury reported that the body was evidently that of a man aged about 21 years of age, and in one of his pockets was found a letter signed by James Booth of Norwood Green. The body was removed to Bradford mortuary. On the 29th of August, the Brighouse News stated that following further inquiries, James Booth was a 19-year-old employed for a number of years by Messrs. A. Walker & Co., clothing manufacturers of Norwood Green. A fortnight previous, he had handed in his notice and this had expired on the 25th, the day his clothing had been spotted lying at the water's edge. The newspaper continued, "The unfortunate young man, whose parents are highly esteemed and respected in Norwood Green, is said to have been of a cheerful temperament. The affair had caused a sensation in the village." At 10 a.m. on Wednesday the 6th of December 1911, after a prolonged search, the Leeds Mercury reported police had recovered the body of John Ben, aged 37, though at his inquest his age was given as 38. John was a labourer and lived at 4 Mill Street, Low Moor. John had been reported missing by his brother Thomas of Harker Street. In these search operations, it was common practice for the police to use one of the rowing boats from Harold Park. John Ben's sister, with whom he lived, told the inquest that he had gone to bed at 9 p.m. on the Sunday, and that it wasn't unusual for him to go to bed at that time. She said he was always somebody who enjoyed a lot of sleep time. On the Monday morning, she heard him get up to leave for his work at about 6:15. Later she heard from one of John's workmates that he hadn't been in work that day. She said he'd been in regular employment and she wasn't aware of him being depressed. John Clayton of number 10 Moortop, Low Moor, described seeing John walking towards Royds Dam about 7 p.m. on the Monday. He noticed nothing peculiar about him at the time. On the Tuesday morning, Police Constable Kendall found some of John's clothing on the banks of the dam. They included a black overcoat, a muffler cap, a pocket handkerchief and a pair of boots. A pint bottle of tea was also found. PC Kendall told the inquest that whenever anybody went missing in Low Moor, their friends would always go to the dam. William Colbert of 59 Manor Row, Low Moor, a teacher of a young man's Sunday school, said the deceased was one of his pupils and was at the school both morning and afternoon on the Sunday. He'd asked John how he was feeling and was told that he felt dull and heavy in the head. Mr. Colbert had never heard John talk of doing away with himself and did not think he was suffering from religious mania. The jury returned a verdict of suicide, but there had not been sufficient evidence as to his state of mind at the time. John Ben is buried in the churchyard of Holy Trinity in Low Moor. Suicides continued unabated, and you must remember that I am only describing occasional incidents. On the 30th of December 1920, the Factory Times reported on a Low Moor mystery. The disappearance of Gaethorne Hardy, aged 43, a dyer's labourer of number 8 Moortop Road, was being investigated by police. 3 weeks previously, Mr. Hardy, who had been suffering for some time with a painful illness, left his home at 5:30 in the morning and had not been seen since. Relatives stated that he had been confined to his house for about a fortnight. On the morning he disappeared, it was exceptionally dark. When he left his bed, his wife followed him downstairs. He rushed out into the road, his wife unable to stop him. She immediately went to his brother's house, who lived nearby. However, Gaethorne was nowhere to be seen, but another person had seen him cross the road in the direction of nearby fields. The police were notified, but no clues to his whereabouts could be ascertained. The Factory Times stated that dragging operations had been going on for some time at Royds Dam, and that the police were also giving their attentions to the pond in Harold Park. What fate befell Gaethorne Hardy, I've been unable to discover. I do know that he is buried in nearby North Byley Cemetery, and his date of death is given as the 3rd of December 1920, possibly the date of his disappearance. Unemployment and illness seem to be the common underlying causes for suicide in many cases. In August 1922, a jury returned a verdict of suicide while of unsound mind. They had heard that Luke Sugden, aged 55, a dyer's labourer of Laverack Place, Wyke, had been out of work and low-spirited due to ill health when his body had been recovered from the dam. Edward Smith of 1 Laverack Place described Luke as being all of a study. On the 10th of March 1923, the body of Edith Wilson, aged 44, a weaver from Cemetery Road, Low Moor, was recovered from the dam. She had last been seen by her brother-in-law when she retired to bed the previous evening. Edith was buried in North Byley Cemetery. A verdict of suicide while of unsound mind was recorded on the 20th of April 1927 at the inquest of Walter Jones, a 50-year-old dyer's labourer of St Mark's Terrace, Low Moor, whose body had been recovered from the dam. The Yorkshire Post on the 6th of September 1929 reported that there would be an inquest that day into the death of William Rowe, a coal merchant of Isaac Street, Brownroyd, Bradford, whose body had been recovered from the dam the day before. At the inquest of the 28th of October 1932 into the death of Percy Myers, aged 34, a woolcomber of Whitehall Avenue, Wyke, the verdict of found drowned was recorded. Mr. Myers had been missing from home since the 4th of October and his body was discovered in the dam. A verdict of suicide while of unsound mind was recorded at the inquest on the 23rd of December 1932 of Harriet Ellen Wilkinson of Huddersfield Road, Low Moor, whose body had been recovered from the dam. Harriet is also buried in North Byley Cemetery. There are so many graves in the cemetery unmarked that I've been unable to locate these. On the 11th of April 1945, the body of a married lady, Lily Stansfield, aged 54, of Longlands Avenue, Denholm, was discovered in Royds Dam. An open verdict was recorded at an inquest into the death of Samuel Wilkes, aged 65, a retired wool comber of No. 4 St James's Square, Manchester Road, Bradford, who was found drowned in the dam. Mr Wilkes had been missing from his lodgings for 6 weeks. Another retired man's body was pulled from the dam on the 7th of May 1955. Arthur Illingworth, aged 70, of the Park, Ruley Lane, had been missing from home since the 23rd of April. Similar stories would continue to be reported through the years. I have deliberately not related any that I consider to be within unacceptable living memory. Though the majority of the deaths related to suicide, there were also occasional tragedies involving young people.
Looking over there, that's Abscott Lane. Okay, let's continue with the walk. A bit dodgy walking on this edge and trying to look through the camera at the same time.
The Bradford Daily Telegraph of Monday the 19th of July 1915 reported that police were continuing with a dragging operation at Royds Dam after a youth, Agibus Greenwood of Copthall Street, West Bowling, was reported drowned the day before when with 5 companions he had been swimming but got into difficulty. He had disappeared beneath the water before he could be reached. It wasn't until 8 days later that his body was recovered. Agibus was a member of All Saints Gymnasium and a wrestler of considerable prowess. He had employment as a wool comber. At his inquest on the 28th of July, his father said his son was a good swimmer and an all-round athlete. He had never known him complain of cramp or of feeling faint. John Kitchingham of 55 Parsonage Road, West Bowling, stated that on the Sunday afternoon of the 18th of July, he, along with Greenwood and 4 other companions, had set off for a walk and ended up at Royds Dam. John said that he and a youth named Cruz had gone for a swim about 3:30, but stayed in the shallow waters. Agibus Greenwood set off to swim right across the dam, a distance of about 300 yards. It was said that Agibus was about 3/4 of the way across, where it was very deep, when John's attention was drawn to youths on the bank shouting. He could see Agibus throw up his arms and then disappear. John and Cruz swam towards the spot, but had to turn back as they were exhausted. John further stated that he did not know whether Agibus had tried to swim 300 yards before. He thought Agibus had had his dinner about 1 o'clock and during the afternoon had not had anything to eat or drink. On the dam bank, Agibus had 2 friendly wrestling bouts with his friends, but had waited to cool down before he entered the water. John said the water was extremely cold. In answer to further questioning, John Kitchingham said he had heard that there were large pike in the water, but in several occasions of swimming there he had never seen them. Similar evidence was provided by Harold Cruz of 104 Gaythorne Road, West Bowling. Tom Wormold of 7 Cemetery Road, Low Moor, described seeing the body floating in the water on Monday the 26th of July, and it was recovered shortly afterwards by P.C. Grimes. Mortuary attendant John Hardcastle said there were no marks or bruises on the body. He knew that pike of up to 8 pounds had been found in Royds Dam. Pike were savage fish, but he didn't think that fish of this size would attack a human being. He had, however, heard of a horse drinking at a river have been seized by pike, and he had also known of people being caught by the foot, and possibly if a fish was very hungry, even fish of the size in the dam, they might attack a person. He reiterated that there were no marks to say Agabus had been attacked in this way. The inquest heard there were signs in place forbidding swimming or trespassing. The Leeds Mercury, in their reporting, gave Agabus Greenwood's home address as Copthorne Street. The jury returned a verdict of accidentally drowned whilst bathing. On Sunday, the 24th of April 1938, a boy hero tried in vain to save his friend before he himself succumbed to the waters of Royds Dam. The two youths drowned while playing on a homemade raft. When the raft capsized, both were thrown into the water. Harold Gaukrodger of Wooler Road was a good swimmer and went to aid his non-swimming friend Reginald Pratt of 13 Southfield Avenue, Odsal. Harold was able to hold up his friend for a time, but was then compelled to let him go in order to try to save himself. Harold turned towards the bank, but was too exhausted to reach safety. He struggled for a few yards, but then sank a few feet from the bank, where the only witness, Arthur Woodhead, a 14-year-old boy of 15 Sergeant Street, Low Moor, was holding out a length of wood. Arthur told the Yorkshire Observer that he had been passing the dam when he saw the raft tip up and the two boys fell into the water. He said, "I was alone and I cannot swim." One boy held the other in his arms for 2 or 3 minutes, then he left him and made for the bank. He was struggling through the water rather than swimming. I got some wood and held it out to him. I said, "Get hold of it with one hand," but he went under about 8 feet from the edge. If he hadn't stopped to help the other boy, he would have made it. Mr. Thomas Scott of Royds Hall Farm had seen the boys playing on the raft, and when they were not to be seen some time afterwards, he hurried to the spot, but said there was not a trace of anything. Mr. Scott, who was a non-swimmer, said it was a wonder there was not another drowned, as in the previous few days he had seen 3 boys using the raft. Harold Gaukrodger had won a number of certificates at school for his swimming. His mother was a widow with 6 children. The newspaper said that this was the second tragedy she'd sustained recently, as her husband died suddenly earlier in the year. Harold's body was quickly recovered, but dragging continued for several hours in the search for Reginald. A grief-stricken figure who watched the operation was fireman Albert Pratt, Reginald's father. He'd been taken to the scene in a police car when news of the fatalities was received. Teams worked in shifts during the remainder of Sunday's daylight hours, then again all day Monday and into the Tuesday. The rocky bottom and the great depth presented serious difficulties for the searchers. Some people maintained there was an old pit shaft beneath the surface. At the inquest into the double drowning, Harold's age was given as 17 and he had been employed as a driver's mate. It was heard that the boys had been warned many times about staying away from the dam. The coroner made a recommendation that children should be taught to swim as readily as to read and write. The jury returned a verdict of accidental death due to drowning in each case, and they recommended that the dam be fenced off on the outside of the south wall adjacent to the public footpath and the east side to the water overflow, and that warning notices should be erected. I don't know whether these recommendations were ever taken up, but there are certainly no fences in place today. The Yorkshire Observer reported on the 1st of July 1955 that frogmen were being used for the first time to search the waters of Royds Dam for the body of a 7-year-old girl. Diane Pearson of 1 Eddercliff Crescent, Liversedge, had drowned on the afternoon of the 29th of June when her father was fishing nearby. Grappling irons had been used during the Wednesday and Thursday in dragging operations, when in the late afternoon it was decided to bring in the 4 frogmen. First into the water were two members of Leeds Underwater Swimming Club. They swam the 8-acre stretch of water, but reported visibility was nil. The rocky bottom and mud hampered efforts, as lifelines were continually caught up on underwater boulders. The two other frogmen were police officers who had been training the previous winter in the use of breathing equipment and the rubber suits. The frogmen searched until they had exhausted their oxygen supply. The paper said that if the operation is a success, it's possible that more police volunteers will undergo training so as to replace the laborious work of dragging. Mr. Pearson, Diane's father, had dived into the water on Wednesday afternoon trying to find his daughter's body. He told reporters he'd heard a splash, looked up and saw that Diane had disappeared. He ran to where he had heard the splash and dived in, but couldn't find her. Diane's body was not recovered until the following Tuesday, the 5th of July, when it was seen floating in the water. The inquest was heard on the 8th of July, with the coroner making the suggestion that big clear warning signs should be put near Royds Dam. The managing director of the owning company of Low Moor Yorkshire Iron Limited said that negotiations to limit the danger were already going on with Bradford Corporation and his company. A verdict of death by shock due to accidental drowning was recorded. An interesting story linked to the dam is that of an aspiring channel swimmer, Joseph Perkins of Buttershaw. In August 1951, the Yorkshire Observer carried a story about Mr. Perkins. Apparently, he was using the dam for training purposes towards his goal of swimming the English Channel. Every week from then until the following summer, he would be swimming in the dam. In the report, it was stated he had swum 12 miles that particular day. Mr. Perkins described himself as a fairly experienced swimmer, but had never attempted such a long swim before. He hoped to increase the distance as he progressed to an attempt at swimming the channel. Mr. Perkins said he hoped to take part in the Morecambe Bay swim, which must have been a long-distance event. It was said that Mr. Perkins and his trainer, Eddie Wood, a qualified swimming coach, were both employees of the Low Moor works of the Yorkshire Best Iron Company Limited. I've searched the official records of the English Channel Swimming Association and dover.uk.com, who hold records of successful cross-channel swims. Unfortunately, Joseph Perkins does not appear. He may well have attempted the swim, but not completed the crossing. If anybody knows, I would be very interested in hearing the story. Please let me know in the comments. I did discover a story in the Telegraph and Argus archives from 1961 of an appearance by Dorothy Perkins, who had become Bradford's first successful cross-channel swimmer. She completed the swim in June of that year, swimming from France and landing at Deal Pier. It is not beyond the imagination to believe Dorothy was related to Joseph and completed the swim he was training for in Royds Dam 10 years before. Sadly, Dorothy died in 2004 at the young age of 62. One final story relating to the dam is the tale of a robbery that had taken place at the business premises of Joseph Dawson in Beck Street, Bradford, in March 1956. A safe had been stolen and some of the contents were found next to the dam. This led the detectives to the home of one of the robbers in nearby Delph Hill. The house backed onto a field leading to the dam. The detectives approached the property and noticed a light was on, even though it was 3 a.m. The occupant answered, and when the house was searched, over £300 in cash was found, and the other two robbers were hiding in the attic. I'm not going to name names, as they may well have put this episode behind them, or their families may not be aware of their dishonesty. The defence stated that they were all out of work at the time of the offence, and it was a case of Satan finding work for idle hands to do. The guilty men were each jailed for 2 years.
This down in this corner now, this is what must feed into Harold Park. This is the route of the water. So this narrow canal, which will disappear under the road at some point up here. Right, it looks like the common track is to go through there, back onto Abscott Lane. So we'll have finished the film here at the point where the dam waters are going to disappear under the road that will lead into Harold Park. Been some awful stories. Thankfully there haven't been any in more recent times that I'm aware of, but I try to, in telling these stories, not to do anything within living memory, just out of respect. But yes, the torture that people, those poor souls, must have gone through walking to this area to do what they did. That, you know, there was no other option for them. So it's very, very sad. In fact, suicides were that common that if anyone went missing for a day or so, the first place they would come and look would be Royds Hall Dam. Anyway, I hope you found it fascinating, and thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate you watching and supporting the channel. So thank you very much, and hopefully I'll see you again, well, wherever the next place we go, the next trip takes us. Okay, till then, Dodger and out.